Yeah, so hi everybody. I'm really excited about this one. Is it rude to ask your age? No, it's actually a legal requirement. In a previous session we had earlier today, they were talking about, at some point in your life, you will always be vulnerable. And one of the most the classes of people that are the most vulnerable in our society are our kids. And so we have Iain Corby, who is the founder and executive chairman of the Association Age Verification Providers Association here in the UK, and he's going to tell us all about the regulations.
Great, thank you very much, Michael. Good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, wherever you are around the world in this hybrid conference. I suspect my body clock is in about the same place as half your audience, because I just got back from California, where I went to two fantastic conferences. One was the Internet Identity Workshop, where Kalia was there doing a fantastic job organising this unconference, and the other was a liminal conference on digital identity. And it certainly seemed that age assurance is quite a big topic in the identity world at the moment. The liminal conference was on Chatham House rules, but one of the large platforms, and I think if you search for large platform, you'd be able to figure out which one it was, says that this is the biggest issue they're facing right now as they look at digital identity. So I'm going to talk about age verification in general, and then very specifically about a European Commission funded project called EU Consent, which is seeking to make that process a little less painful. Essentially what Michael and I discussed when he asked me on the hoof a couple of weeks ago to present was that we've reached a tipping point with age verification. Increasingly, the EU requires all member states, in all member states, that organisations are verifying the age of their users. There's a whole load of legislation and regulation that's driving that change, and we have a solution on the table to try and make it a little less painful for the consumer. A little bit about who I work for. The AVPA has been around since 2018. It actually grew up out of the Digital Policy Alliance, which in itself grew out of the preparations for the Digital Economy Act in the UK, which was going to introduce a porn block and a requirement to prove your age to access pornography online. So a number of companies figured out how to do that, putting an enormous premium on protecting the anonymity of users, because nobody really wants to know about my dwarf porn habit. So we went through a large amount of investment, and then the government got cold feet when it knew it had an election coming and pulled the plug. That is now coming back in the UK, but in the meantime, there have been a whole other load of use cases that have come to the fore. So what we do as a trade association is probably very similar to what you guys do with this organisation. We're looking at creating standards, building out the markets, and building the reputation of the sector, because we do take some criticisms from those who will never believe that what we do will protect their anonymity and their data. So why now? Well, as I said, I think we've reached a tipping point, and this has come from a whole range of legislation, not just in Europe, but around the world. A lot of it is driven by pornography, but increasingly questions around data protection and around targeted advertising. So whenever you consider any legislation or regulation that asks you to treat online children differently from adults, you immediately have that problem that on the internet nobody knows you're a dog. On the internet nobody knows if you're an adult or a child until we've done something to try to find that out. In the UK specifically, we have the Audiovisual Media Services Directive affecting 18 well-known video sharing platforms. Within GDPR, both in the UK and Europe, slightly more strongly in the UK, age-appropriate design is important, and that goes even beyond the adult versus child. We're now looking at serving age-appropriate content to different age ranges of children. Then there's lots of specific bits of legislation. The French and the Germans are doing battle with the top porn companies at the moment, trying to get them to apply age verification. And if you go further afield, Australia, New Zealand are looking at this. And even California is thinking of an age-appropriate design code. I think in the US we will see change state by state rather than necessarily at the federal level. Another big area is advertising. So in the UK, the government recently moved to ban all digital advertising of high-fat, salt and sugar foods because they didn't believe the claim that these ads could be targeted only at adults. It may be actually they were trying to get the adults to lose some weight as well. But equally, we might see that with gambling. And it was at that point that some of the large platforms got interested in age verification because they could see the revenues from those big categories being put at risk. And then, of course, we've got the Digital Services Act, Digital Markets Act coming through from Europe shortly, which will have another impact already through the advertising lens, but quite possibly in other dimensions. The Online Safety Bill in the UK is going to go through over the course of the next year, and there's a significant difference in how you treat children to how you treat adults. A couple of very specific pieces. The AVMSD is being implemented country by country in Europe. We're all waiting for Cyprus to get its act together because they tend to have most of the large, well-known tube porn sites based there. So we've been working with them to try to support them in getting some regulations into place. And then the Irish have been quite helpful in confirming that it's okay to use people's data for the purposes of age assurance. Lots of people got themselves tied up in knots about it being catch-22. How can I use a child's data if I'm not allowed to access children's data to check that they're not a child? And thankfully, some common sense has broken out there, both in Ireland and in the UK. But it's not just pornography, which is tended to start this. There are various different categories which require age restrictions: content, products, and services. I tend to think of them as hard and soft limits. The hard ones are the ones where you really need to know that somebody's passed their 18th birthday before you sell them a bottle of beer, otherwise you're facing a large fine. The soft ones are where there's no particular regulation or legislation driving that. And then the softened ones are those where perhaps regulators would think it disproportionate to take action if you let a couple of 17-year-olds through the net. So the definition for us of age verification is almost not identity. So it's proving your age or verifying your age online without having to disclose your full identity. So I think it's a mistake to think of age verification as a subset of identity. Full identity is a great place to start to get somebody's date of birth and check their age, but there are many other ways of doing it. We're trying to build standards around this because if you go to the US and you ask somebody to apply age verification on their website, you'll just get a checkbox or a request for a date of birth. Sometimes those date of birth entry forms won't allow you to put in a date of birth that makes you too young to use the site. That's really helpful if you're trying to lie about your age. We created a BSI standard in 2018. We're about to publish an IEEE standard if the good people of the IEEE sign it off, and in a couple of years, because it takes a little while, it turns out, an ISO framework covering all this, just to really make it clear what we're doing, not only in terms of the rigor of age verification, but the level of assurance that we do, because clearly there are different, not all age verifications are created equal. We also have a distinction perhaps between estimation and verification. So verification tends to come from the hard verifiers looking at government ID, going to the electoral roll or a credit reference database. Estimation can be based on your face, how you speak, who your friends are, how you behave, how you hold your Oculus glasses when you are in the metaverse. Really anything that changes with your age is susceptible to artificial intelligence figuring out an estimate of your age. But both can allow you to get to very high levels of assurance, because with the estimation, you just need to create a buffer. And if the buffer between the age you test for with the AI is big enough in difference from the actual legal age, then there's a vanishingly small chance that you've got it wrong. So if the AI says I'm over 25, apparently it does, there's really no chance that it's got it so wrong that I'm still under 18. And that's something we're going to have to work with regulators to convince, because regulators like nice black and white answers. But when you explain to them that in most supermarkets, they only get about 85% of age checks right, we think 99 or 99.5 is a pretty good number. But there are a wide range of sources of age. Open banking, perhaps one of the more interesting and recent ones, not standard data in what's disclosed through open banking, but one of our members has secured that data, mentioning mobile numbers sort of connects us to the previous content. Estimation got off to a bit of a bad start because a US body called NIST did some testing on the early algorithms and felt that they were very discriminatory against people with dark skin. That's basically because the algorithms are only as good as the training data you put into them. And so what some of our members have been doing is really working hard to improve the accuracy of estimation, not only across skin tones, but also across different age groups. These are the most recent figures from Yoti, who've perhaps been at this the longest and probably spent the most. And as you can see, they've got their sort of mean average error at the 18 to 24 age group down to 2.22. So if you were testing for 18 and you set a limit of 21, you'd be fairly certain that you were making sure you had people who are adults. It is a bell curve, and one of the things we're working on is how do you measure the accuracy of this stuff, because regulators will be interested in the outliers. They'll obviously want to know that most things are very close to the real age when you do the estimate. So people could do their own AV in-house. They can use profiling. There's various different options. Five Rights, which is a charity focused on sort of looking after kids, did an assessment of all the various options, and what this demonstrates is they quite like independent third parties doing this job. It's also similar to the new requirement to prove who you are to Twitter or any other major social media account when the new online safety bill goes through. I don't want to give Elon Musk my passport, but I might be willing to give it to a independent third party who's audited and certified, and that third party would simply confirm to Twitter that I am identifiable, but not necessarily give them my identity unless there was a legal cause to do so. So that's a sort of an extension of the same architecture. I'm running a little behind, so let me crack on to EU consent. With all those laws coming forwards, the European Parliament was put under some pressure from large platforms to say, you're asking us to check everybody's age online, but there's just no way to do this. And so they commissioned a pilot project, which we bid for with 10 other partners, including academic organisations like the University of Leiden and the LSE, where Professor Sonia Livingston is based. So we had some academics making sure that we were looking out for the interests of children. We put together an advisory board which comprises a few large platforms, some of the big trade associations and charities from across Europe, as well as regulators, bodies that coordinate regulation, particularly in audiovisual and data protection, which has been helpful, not in just giving us advice, but also in getting the message out there that we're doing this job. We didn't really have a solution when we started. We wanted to go back to first principles. We went out and we asked children and parents and adults what they thought about this. Our academics did some research about what's going on right now and what best practice would be. And then we came up with this thing called EU consent. So it's a network of individual age verification providers who agree common levels of assurance. They all have to be audited and certified, so they're part of a trust framework. It's an anonymised and tokenized system, although the tokenization is only really there for user convenience. It's not critical. We were trying essentially to mean you could cruise around the internet, look at 30 different sites where you needed to prove your age, and not have to take some action on each and every one of those sites so that you were constantly being interrupted as you went around the internet. And we've structured this network in a way that preserves an open and competitive market. And so when it goes live, anybody, any of you in this room, anyone you like can apply, can join. They have to go through an audit and certification process, obviously. But then essentially they just plug in a Docker, is the technical term. This is where my PPE degree lets me down. They add a Docker to their software, and this allows them to interact with all the other people on the network. Everybody works through a single domain. You become a subdomain on that, so you can recognize these first-party cookies and realize that, oh yes, this user has done an age check yesterday with that AV provider. So instead of me doing a new age check, I will simply get this user to go back to the original AV provider, re-authenticate, and then that provider will tell the new provider that I'm old enough, yes or no, to get in. No point in that do I share any particular personal data. The only personal data which was potentially shared, assuming I did use a method that required personal data, was with the original AV provider. After that, it's just yes, no answers. We've done a pilot across 1,600 kids and adults and parents and in 5 different countries. They just had to cruise around 5 different three different websites. So they went to an alcohol dummy site. We didn't think it was a good idea to show lots of booze to kids. They did their age verification. This is how the OT system would work. They had a number of options. They could do estimation, or they could use some ID. This is my attempt to do estimation. I don't do live demos any longer because A, it gives away how old the AI thinks I am, which is even older than I really am, and B, it sometimes doesn't work. But anyway, you go through that, and then we would return the people doing the pilot to the survey, and then they go to a new site. I think this one might be called Date Me, and all they see at this point is this little whirring buzzer. I mean, it's not perfect. It takes a couple of seconds to do its job, but in that time, it's going back to the first site, checking that they know who you are, and getting that answer to allow you to get back in without you having to do that whole age verification process. 80% of the people doing the pilot got through 2 missions, 60% got through to the third website. Actually, the reason most of them failed was bad user experience on the individual AV providers. So in terms of the bit we created, that will work fine. But we are just trying to fix that, because it's obviously good feedback for the participating companies to try and make their sites more usable. And then we're going to do another small-scale pilot in a couple of months just to tie up those loose ends. So with that, I'm very happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, and we only can have time for one, basically mine. And I just want you to verify two points here. When it comes to age, one thing we talked about yesterday was about verified attributes. So this whole SSI model and the ability to verify either day I was born, month I was born, year I was born, I'm over in age, I am in age, all of that can be verified cryptographically using these methods too, yes?
Yes, yeah. I mean, these are great ways of doing it, but we've been talking about this stuff for 5 years. We had 18 months to put this pilot into operation, so we've modeled it on how current AV operates and made that interoperable. But we have an infrastructure that can grow. The technology can change underneath the governance we've put in place.
And my last question for you, and I think this is a good one, like there's a company called Privo in the US that actually allows you to take that age stamp and assign it to a device. So I now know that that device is age gated, not just any of the individual apps. And that you see more of that happening.
Privo are members of the trade association, so we obviously talked to them. We didn't, again, pragmatically, we didn't want to do anything where we had to try and work with device manufacturers, people who build operating systems. We wanted to be self-sufficient to get something that worked.
Well, this is very important stuff. So unfortunately, you're out of time, but please set up Iain at a break. Thank you very much.
Thank you.